Welcome. You're listening to How I Did That, a storytelling podcast. Let's jump into today's episode.
What's up?
Hey, what's up? How are you doing?
I am good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for joining me today.
Of course.
So maybe you can start with just introduce yourself to the audience and what your background is in and what you do right now.
Sure. So my name is Michael Crawford. I am the co-founder of EdSpace, which is a social learning network for the world of education, kind of a cross between Slack and Snapchat and LinkedIn for the world of education. I came to that work from a bunch of different directions, we'll say. It's been a bit of a journey. So I started in youth sports. I worked for an organization in Michigan that focused on youth soccer. And so I started there and got to see kind of the behind the scenes of what it means to be a youth soccer coach and parent. I saw the way that adults interacted with young people. And so I didn't totally love all the things that I saw. And so I wanted to learn more about that. So that jumped me over to a master's degree in sports psychology, where I focused on youth sports and understanding parent education, coach education, the way that youth sports support development in terms of character and leadership and qualities like that. This is the fast version, by the way. From there, I realized sports was only one context for youth development, and I needed to kind of zoom out and broaden my understanding of youth development. So I went to pursue a PhD in educational psychology, really with a focus on adolescent development and after-school programs. And so I did that for a long time. It took me a while longer than I think most people. And then during that, I ended up working for a foundation, doing kind of assessment and data work. From there, jumped over to an entrepreneurial mindset company where I helped with program development and curriculum. From there, jumped to a storytelling company that kind of was a blend between college access and technology and storytelling, and kind of a cool platform there. From there, I joined a group, nonprofit in San Diego called Real World Scholars. They sit at the intersection of education and entrepreneurship, and they help classrooms, kindergarten through 12th grade classrooms, start and run businesses. So it was there that we began to see teachers who we were supporting need and not get the kind of support they needed. And so it was from that recognition that we launched into where we are now with EdSpace, and that's where I am. That's where I am today. That was the very Cliff's Notes version from post-undergrad to today.
So we're going to go back to when you were in college, right? So you did an undergraduate degree in psychology, correct?
That's correct. Yep. And I did that not completely knowing where I wanted to end up. I did that because I have always been interested in the ways people thought and the ways that they made decisions. I was of the opinion then, as I am today, that I usually just say it as people suck at living. Most people, myself included, make decisions that are not always healthy and are oftentimes harmful. And I wanted to understand how that could be. We have so much technology, so much information, access to data and people and programs and all kinds of things. The ways to live well and live healthy and develop healthy relationships and build sustainable things, all of that information is out there. The ingredients are out there, and yet we continue to harm one another and harm ourselves. And so I saw a version of that and wanted to understand humans and the ways that we thought and what went into that, and hopefully with the goal of learning enough that I could contribute to a team or an organization or a company or do something that tipped the scale a little bit more towards healthy and beneficial. So, my thinking was then, and even today in some ways, had been, if I could improve everybody's life by 1%, then that would be a significant change in the way that people live. That was my thinking then. I pursued psychology, had a minor in political philosophy, very interested in just thinking and kind of the ways things work, but didn't necessarily have a plan for what happened after that. Knew I didn't want to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist. That wasn't exactly the path. I wanted the learning and the information and the experience of a psychology major, but not necessarily the clear and direct paths that most folks take after that. Right after undergrad, I didn't have any real job prospects, and I didn't totally know what direction I wanted to go. I had played sports as a young person, had been an athlete all my life, and a friend of a friend, basically, their mom worked at, it was Michigan State Youth Soccer Association, MSYSA. They worked there, and it was, spring, summertime. And so I was an intern for the first 3 months, maybe more, after I graduated. So I, moved back in with my parents. I got this internship at MSYSA. From there, I ended up getting a job at MSYSA. And while there, I began to really begin thinking, like, what do I want to do? What am I interested in? And working at a sport association, I thought, okay, I'm interested in psychology. I have a sports background. What happens when those two things collide? Is there a thing called sports psychology? And turns out there is. And it also turns out that at Michigan State, up in East Lansing, they had a lab, kind of like a center. It was called the Institute for the Study of Youth Sports. And it was connected to the College of Education. And so I had started taking some online classes, working towards a certificate. There were 3 online classes that the Institute offered. I took 2 of those, I think, pretty quickly after I started at MSYSA. And then I started really kind of getting into it. I started thinking a bit more, started doing more research on my own, and looked at Michigan State and what degrees they had at the grad level. And they had a master's degree in kinesiology with an emphasis on psychosocial aspects of sport and physical activity, which sort of shortened to sports psychology. And this institute was focused on youth sports, which is what I was interested in, had kind of more of an educational angle. A lot of folks who go into sports psychology go into kind of working with athletes one-on-one, or working with upper-level college or professional or Olympic teams and athletes, really on the sort of the performance side. And I was interested in that a bit, but I was more interested in understanding how sport can be used from an educational kind of developmental perspective, knowing that there are millions of young people in this country and throughout the world who play sports and engage in sports. I want to understand how something I loved, sports, could be a beneficial experience as opposed to a harmful one, which I saw working at MSYSA, not for everyone, but more than I had hoped.
You think it's a very specific field? Like if someone were to graduate with your background after your master's, like what kind of job opportunities would they have?
Good question. So the people that I was in grad school with went into a number of different directions. Some of them became professors or faculty. They studied sport and exercise science. They studied nutrition. They studied sport psychology and performance. They studied youth sports and did research there. So there's a sort of a faculty, a professor angle to this that many of the folks that I went to grad school with went into. And actually, I bet most of them went in that direction in a sort of academic route. There were a handful of folks in there that went the more professional route. So they went into consulting. A good friend of mine, Dr. Eric Bean, is a performance consultant. He's worked with Navy SEALs and surgeons and high-level corporate CEOs. And so there is that path. He was much more in the performance side of things. I would say those are the 2 main areas. I think people with I got a master's. There were a few other people when I was there that were getting a master's, and a handful more that were getting PhDs. I think people with those backgrounds go into academia. They go into kind of that consulting performance space, and others, who get masters in sports psychology or sports administration, go into working at universities or working at professional sports teams, maybe in the front office. I would say those are the main ways. It was a realization of sorts for me while there that, obviously sport is one domain. There's sports, there's music, there's service, there's a whole range of different kinds of contexts for youth development. And sport was certainly one. And for me, I felt like, okay, great. I kind of did a deep dive in a narrower space, then zooming out that would be the more beneficial path for what I was interested in.
During your master's, did you have to do a thesis, or did you have to focus on something and do some research during that time?
I did, yeah. I think there might have been a few options, and depending on the particular program at Michigan State, you could do, I think, either like a big project. You could create a product. You could, I don't know, you'll have to take a look. But for me, yes, I did write a thesis. I did do research. My master's thesis, I don't know the title off the top of my head. So in Michigan, there's the association that runs all of athletics in Michigan is called the Michigan High School Athletic Association. And they have a leadership panel, a student athlete leadership panel that is comprised of student athletes from across the state, predominantly seniors, but also some juniors. And these athletes come together virtually, but also in person to help MHSAA make decisions about all kinds of things. And what I was interested in was less their kind of governance activities, but in more about these individual athletes as leaders. I was interested in the ways in which my interest was in engagement, and what does it mean? How does engagement come about in a sport context? What role do coaches and parents play? What about teammates? That's what I was really interested in, sort of engagement in terms of like motivation, essentially. And so that's what my thesis was on.
Okay, so it's exactly what you specifically wanted to do, which was sports psychology, and you got to find something in that field to research.
And I think that is how it usually goes. My advisor, Dr. Dan Gould, was amazing, and my thesis was my interest. If I want to do a thesis on something completely outside of sports psych, he may have kind of dissuaded me from that, or we would have figured out a different advisor that would have made sense. But because it was kind of in his wheelhouse, anything within there was available for me, and that's what I was interested in. Other people, made other choices, and I also know that other programs, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes master's theses and even PhD dissertations are much more connected to the advisor than driven by the individual student, and so that can be a difference. But for me, I got to sort of dictate my interests.
That's great, because I have heard about that as well, where I know other people doing master's programs, they don't always get to pick what they want to work on, because whatever professor, you have to find a professor to help you with your thesis, right?
Yeah. You have a main advisor usually, who described as like the chair of your committee, and then the committee will be, depending. At master's, I think I had 3, maybe 4 total. Eventually, at my PhD, I think I had 5 total. So it just depends on the program and the school. But yeah, usually there's one person who is kind of responsible for you doing.
Right, and that person's not always in the field that you want specifically.
Exactly. Yeah, that happens. For people whose interests have shifted, maybe they got into one program at the beginning, and over time, after taking some courses or doing some research, they have found a different interest that doesn't align with their initial advisor. Then, yeah, it can be a little tricky, or you can, sometimes it's easy to transfer advisors. It all depends.
For your PhD, did you take any time off, or was it right away, like master's to PhD, or what did you do after graduation?
Yeah, so 2007 started my master's program. In 2009, I got into a PhD program at the University of Kansas. And so May of 2009, I got married. I went on my honeymoon. I came back, and like the next day we got in a U-Haul truck and drove from Michigan to Lawrence, Kansas. So, and at that time I started my PhD before I completed my master's. I completed all the components of the master's except for the thesis. So I had conducted the research, or I had gathered data, and all I needed to do was analyze it and write the thesis and then defend it. And I had done that after I started my PhD. So there was a little bit of an overlap. But yeah, I went right from one grad school to the next grad school.
So was it in your mind, like while you were doing your master's, did you have the idea that you wanted to go and do a PhD? Because it is a very long-term investment. It's like 5 years usually, right? So
Usually.
when did you start thinking about that?
Yeah, while in grad school for my master's, it was in sort of a similar place. I felt like similar place as I was in undergrad, but this time I knew like I needed to be a little bit more proactive. I can't finish my master's and then just say like, okay, now what? So I started looking around at different places to work. I started looking at different organizations and labs and different places that might be doing the kind of work that I was interested in. And I also began thinking more long-term about, not only in the short term, might need a job after this master's, but also 5 years, 10 years from now, what kind of work do I want to be doing? At the time, I felt like the kind of work that I saw myself doing, which was sort of roughly working in an organization at the kind of program level, having influence over whether it was at a district or some other kind of governing body that could have influence over other, a lot of other things beneath it, essentially. I would need more knowledge. And my thinking around a PhD was no matter what I know, for people to listen to me or to consider what I have to say, it would help if after my name on the agenda, it said PhD. I thought at the time that I didn't want to be a faculty member. I didn't want to do research and teach forever. That was not an interest of mine, which is usually the direction people go when they get PhDs. I don't know the numbers off the top, but my sense is most people graduating with PhDs are going into academia. But I knew I didn't want to do that. But I did want some of the other benefits that come from a PhD. So that was kind of what inspired me to continue staying in school. Not to mention, I like learning, and I didn't quite have a specific profession or career path in mind yet. So a little bit more school would kind of check a few boxes for me.
Right. And PhD does hold a lot of weight, and you get very specific into the field you want to work in. So you're like the expert in your field after that, usually.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely helps with that. I think both from a kind of a real sense in terms of, I have read more, research papers and digested more research generally, both from the consumption side of things and also producing research, understanding the inner workings of it, doing it, conducting it, than most other people do. And also more specific to my field. Even most people with PhDs haven't done research in adolescent development and out of school time programs in an urban setting, for example. So yes, it definitely does. It does do that.
When did you graduate from your PhD? Like what years were you in school?
Great. That's a wonderful question. So my master's started in 2007 and I finished it in 2010. So that next year after I started. In my PhD, I started in 2009 and finished in 2018, which is a longer time than anyone hoped for.
So what
should do, I would say.
So usually I've heard that PhDs are 5 years, but from what I know, a lot of students doing it in 5 years are doing it like full-time, right? Full-time school. From the beginning to the end of your PhD, how did that go? And you had to do like a dissertation, right? And then what do you learn? And what exactly was the title of your program?
Yeah, good questions. Okay, so the title of the program was, it was a PhD in educational psychology and research at KU, University of Kansas in Lawrence, there were two paths under educational psychology and research. One was development and learning, and one was research, evaluation, measurement, and statistics. So the latter one is a bit more kind of assessment, evaluation, quantitative heavy. The first one, development and learning, has those elements, but it also focuses a bit more on development and learning. And so I went in that pathway, the development and learning pathway. The way that it kind of broke down was in 2009, I was a full-time student. 2009 to 2012, I was a full-time student. So usually it's about 3 years of coursework and then a year plus for comprehensive exams and dissertation. So depending on the back end, depending on the dissertation, it could take a couple months. or it could take a year or two, or depending on what other things you have going on, it could take a lot longer. So yeah, for the first few years, I was full-time student. I got all of my credits completed kind of in the right pacing, the right timing. I also then completed my comprehensive exams, which are a set of exams that are essentially questions from individual faculty members. So these faculty are faculty that were also on my dissertation committee. They each provide 1 to 3 questions, 1 to 4 questions that are big questions that you will at KU, and this is true, I think, most places, although it's a little different maybe. These questions are big questions that require, each question could be like a 20-page paper, could be, kind of big. And then that's not the required part. The required part is, at KU at least, the oral defense. So you basically go in and there is a multi-hour oral exam, oral defense of your questions. And so you go in and, they've already read what you've produced, and then they come in and start asking you questions about what you wrote and what about this, and have you thought about this, and this isn't quite right, can you say more about this? And so that's kind of the comprehensive exam experience. And then for me, the dissertation, a couple of things happened. So I proposed a research project that at the time I was living in Lawrence still, but I was working in Kansas City. So first 3 years, 100% full-time student, all my coursework. At the end of that 3 years, in November of 2012, I took a job at the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City. I started there and went part-time school, full-time work. And for the first year of that work, finished comprehensive exams. From then on, I was still full-time working and then starting to work on my dissertation. So the first research project that I proposed for my dissertation was a project based in Kansas City. It was around young people and adults working together to create a program, essentially a space for them to come together to solve community problems. And so I was interested in, and still am, youth-adult partnerships. So the ways in which young people, so teens and adults, can work together. How do they share power? What is how do young people and adults describe the space? What are the expectations here? Who talks more than others? What roles do young people and adults have? Those kinds of things. And so I started my project in Kansas City. And actually, let me zoom back for a second. So the way that the dissertation works is you come up with a project, something that you want to research, and you propose it to your committee. You say, this is what I'm going to do, this, I'm going to measure everything. And it's a pretty big, it basically turns into the first 2-3 chapters of your dissertation at the end. So it's just a proposal, but it's a pretty big deal. You submit it, and then you go in and present it to them, and they ask you questions, and you say yes, no, yes, or this is how I'm going to do that, or I hadn't thought about that. Anyway, so I got that approved, and I started my project. And within, I don't know the exact time, 6 months or so of collecting data, 2 things happened. One, it wasn't beginning to materialize in the way that I thought, which is not necessarily a huge problem. It can be part of the research, and I can write about or describe how things didn't go as well, or didn't go how I had planned, and that's okay because this. But also, we ended up moving back to Michigan from Kansas, and so I had this dissertation project that wasn't really working, and I was moving back to Michigan, so I couldn't continue to engage with the young people and adults in Kansas City, and so I basically had to amend my previous proposal, propose a new dissertation project back in Michigan, then go from there. And so I did that, all while working full-time still. We lived back in Michigan for 2 years. One of those years, one sort of school year, fall and then into the spring, I was collecting data. It was a project that I went to, there's a really great program in Ann Arbor called Neutral Zone, and it's a teen center. It's the youth program that I'm aware of where young people are responsible for more things than anywhere else. So young people at Neutral Zone are responsible for hiring and firing and evaluating staff. They're responsible for raising funds. They're responsible for determining what programs they offer. They're responsible for implementing and delivering those programs. And it's not them just by themselves. Adults are there also, but it's an incredible space and place for youth adult partnerships, which is still what I was interested in. So I would go there twice a week and I would attend a few of their meetings and just take notes. Ultimately, I ended up interviewing 12 young people and 4 adults. I also administered a survey, collected data over the course of a year. At that point, we ended up moving to California. So I moved to California. I had all my data, so I didn't need to collect any more. And then it was just a matter of analyzing it and writing it. And that process for me took a ton of time. It was something that it was difficult for me to prioritize when there's just a lot going on. I had 1 kid at the time, and we moved to California, and I had a new job, and my wife had a new job. And so there was just a lot of things happening. While in California, though, 2017, we moved there. In 2018 is when I got everything done. I flew to Kansas from California to defend in person. So the end of the dissertation process, for me at least, and I think for most, is a defense, an oral defense. And so I had already written everything, submitted to them. A couple weeks later, I went to Kansas to defend it. It's a presentation, a multi-hour presentation of what I found and why I did it this way, and what I didn't find but expected to. They gave me feedback, and so I made the changes in the course of about a week, and then I submitted it, and I was officially done. I actually defended my dissertation on my birthday in 2018 in October, and then completed it by Halloween. Then it was over.
Nice. Long journey. So the first time you were doing the dissertation, so when you were doing that and the first time it didn't work out, like what was going on that you had to, like, I mean, you were moving, so you switched the product as well, but what do you think happened where it went wrong, but you thought it would have worked in the beginning when you pitched the idea?
It's a good question. What I had done is I was working at the Kauffman Foundation, and we had access to middle school, high school, and college students. I convened some of the adults that I worked with, some adults that were in the community, and then some of the young people that we were working with. And the idea was that we would come together. I say we, but the youth and the adults would come together and talk about what they could create together that would impact or improve Kansas City. And so that was the original idea, and there were people who were interested in that. And I think what happened was, even though people said that they were interested, and even though they liked the idea, they weren't interested enough to make it happen themselves. And I think this happens in lots of different contexts where people are enthusiastic for a moment, or they like the idea of something, but when it comes down to actually doing the work and figuring it out and somebody taking charge, it doesn't necessarily materialize. And I think it was a version of that. And so for me, as a researcher, there are things that I could begin to look at in terms of the way that they spoke to one another, in the ways that the kinds of things that they said in terms of expectations and what they wanted to have happen, and how energized they were about this. I could have spoken to some of those things, and how youth adult partnerships, just because you get youth and adults in a room who say they want to work together, there are other factors that matter also. And so I think those were the issues. I wanted to see it kind of grow from the ground up. The particular group that I had, just the way that it was all situated, it just, essentially, like, you can't just sort of throw the ingredients in the pot and like expect a good dish to come out. Like, that's just not how it works. I learned that there, then moved to Michigan, and wasn't going to try to kind of recreate a new environment where, we're starting from scratch again. Instead, I wanted to jump into an existing program that I had known about Neutral Zone for a while. And so I chose to jump into an existing program, and rather than study how a program starts, I'll just study what a program looks like that's already doing this, basically.
It does sound easier doing it the second time. Yeah, that sounds easier. For
sure.
And I guess you only learn from trying to go about it, right? And then what works better. So then when you finish a dissertation, do these get published in a journal, or what happens to the project you taken so much time to work on?
Great question. So they do get published. I don't think it's technically published in a journal. It is published. It is searchable in a by a publisher, basically, by an academic publisher. I'm trying to
Or is
think
it
of
like through the university's database?
It is, yep. So you can go that way, but also, I mean, anybody in the world can search for it and find it. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but there are a range of academic publishers that publish multiple journals, and this particular academic publisher has a relationship with the University of Kansas, and so they are the ones that publish all the dissertations and all the theses. So it is that, and then also you can order a printed copy, kind of like a bound copy, and so I have a bound, like a hardcover of my dissertation also. It sits on a shelf, and it is available for other, researchers or scholars to be able to refer to. Like even in my dissertation research, in the references and the works cited, there were a few dissertations that I referred to because they had spoken to some of the topics that I was interested in.
Okay, can dissertations be published in journals, or what would that process be like?
Yep. So, and they often are, not usually as a full dissertation published directly into a journal, just kind of as is, but oftentimes what happens is from dissertation research, a few published papers may come from that. So there might be a certain piece of the dissertation. Maybe, like in mine, for example, if I wanted to do this, I could have gone in this direction. I did interviews, I did observations, and I did some surveys. If I wanted to, I could have taken those surveys and I could have tried to publish the survey results from that. I could have done that also with some of the qualitative, the observation and interviews as well. There are some dissertations. So I'm thinking of, I think a friend of mine, her dissertation was on the purpose of school. I think she had also done interviews, and I believe that she, got 2 papers basically out of her dissertation. I also know that there are some people who, based on their dissertation work, write more public-facing books. There was a great one from the University of Chicago that I read for part of my comprehensive exams, where this person had done their dissertation, and then they basically converted their dissertation and all the kind of academic speak to a more mainstream book about the things that they found. And they added a bit more kind of narrative and some other ways of making it a little bit more relatable for a non-academic audience, but it stemmed from their dissertation. So if I were to be going into academia, I think I would have done that probably. Going into becoming a faculty member, a professor, oftentimes one of the things that they look for is publications. And so if you can convert your dissertation into some publications, then that can help you. Different programs might be different. I mean, there could be requirements that it could be the expectation that the research that one does for their dissertation will also be converted into a paper to a journal. My requirements were a dissertation, comprehensive exams, and a series of courses. Different programs have different criteria. And so it could be that getting one article published in a refereed journal is part of your requirements. Then, it could have been that.
Yeah. After you finished your PhD, you mentioned that at the time you were working at Kauffman.
I started my PhD, then started working at Kauffman.
Yeah, so you were working and doing your PhD, and once you finished your PhD, were you still at Kauffman, or what were you doing then?
I was not. So I actually worked for Kauffman was, employer number one. I probably worked for 2 or 3 other organizations before completing my dissertation in 2018. So I was working for Kauffman, doing my PhD work. Then I moved back to Michigan and took a role for a remote. There was a company based out of Cleveland called the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. And Eli created some incredible entrepreneurial mindset curriculum. So it was based on a book that was written by the founder of Eli about the entrepreneurial process and the importance of an entrepreneurial mindset. And they had built some curriculum that where people would go, they would get trained in the curriculum, and then these trainers could then go and deliver the curriculum in, I think at the time might have been middle school, high school, community colleges, workforce boards, all kinds of places, boot camps. Like it could really be delivered anywhere, after school programs. And so I joined the team as a chief academic officer, and with my background in educational psychology and in adolescent neuroscience and some of the things, sociology, I was basically working to substantiate the curriculum that they created that kind of was derived from a practical sense, from experience and from kind of on the ground work. And I was trying to kind of weave in the research and to explain why actually what these 8 steps in this entrepreneurial mindset process, why not only did they work, but this is why they work based on the research. So that was one role. They shifted kind of priorities where they wanted to go. And so I was let go from that position. And I ended up taking another position at a company called Story 2. And it was based out of New York. And it was a technology slash storytelling slash writing company. And they had a whole protocol for helping people convert their stories into essays and into kind of more, how do they use them? Essentially for college going essays. So, oftentimes college essays are tricky, and at the same time, people have stories in their lives that aren't necessarily these big, huge stories, but they are stories that communicate something about you and your character and your skills. And so they had technology that kind of helped walk people through that. And so I joined that team. I was only there for a little while. They shifted kind of the way that they were doing their work. They had to downsize also. And so I was only there for a little bit.
So with Story 2, basically it helped students to write essays, but it brought personal stories into it to enhance essay writing, I guess?
Exactly, yeah. So they have a protocol, and they had kind of an approach and some technology that helped extract certain kinds of stories from people, and then help them take those stories and repackage them as essays to be able to communicate who you are, where you've been, what you know, what you can do, kind of thing. And so these were, the idea is that I think oftentimes people think if they aren't, if they don't have some amazing story, if they didn't win, a medal at the Olympics, or they aren't a refugee, or like they don't have these like really, rich stories, that they don't know how to communicate like who they are and what they're good at. And it turns out that all of us have a range of stories, and even though we might not be Olympic medalists, or we might not have built a computer from parts we found in the basement or something, we all have done things that show who we are. And ultimately, for college essays in particular, that's really what they're looking for. They're not looking for cliches. They're not looking for, they don't want you to write about what you think they want to hear. They want to know who you are, and there are ways to communicate through writing and through stories that can do that better. And that's really what Story 2 did at the time.
Were they all for college admissions essays? Was that the main customer base?
That was the main customer base at the time that I was there. So they had, Story 2 had partnerships or relationships with a range of schools. They also worked with one-on-one clients. So in addition to having this kind of technology and protocol, they had coaching. And so oftentimes either for more affluent students or entire programs could purchase blocks of time for coaching, where students would jump on Skype with a coach, and the coach would help the student kind of find the stories and ultimately then get the stories onto paper and kind of massage the stories so that they're the best they could be. And so the main customers were either organizations or schools that could pay in bulk for either presentations from Story 2 or just access to the technology. And then they had coaching as well.
It's a very interesting idea. And so do they do this worldwide? They can just hop on Skype with anyone?
They can, yeah. And they focused, you'll have to check them out now because it's been a little while, but at the time they focused on US predominantly, but also they had relationships with a few private schools, I think, or a few schools in China because there are a lot of students, in this case in China, who wanted to come to US universities. It was not always easy for them to, it's not easy for anybody, whether you're an English speaker or not, to write these essays usually. But it's certainly not easy if English is not your first language. And so there was a partnership with folks in China as well. And it wasn't just US universities, I believe. I think the protocol, the method that they used was also useful for Chinese students to get into Chinese universities as well. So I was only there for a little while, for 6 months or so. And so I don't completely know all the details of that. And I also don't completely know how Story 2 has shifted, if they have, since 2016, I think. 2016, I was let go from 2 jobs, which is a wild experience. Mm-hmm. After that, in 2017, in February, so it was 2017, but I was on Twitter and I was tweeting. I believe President Obama was talking about entrepreneurship and young people and skills. And I was tweeting about how it's important for young people to have opportunities to do non-academic things, to do things that connect to their community. And one of the co-founders of an organization called Real World Scholars, which is a nonprofit based in San Diego, saw my tweet and reached out and said, hey, we have this program that provides funding and technology and community and curriculum to kindergarten through 12th grade classrooms around the country, helping them to start and run businesses. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And he's like, would you mind kind of taking a look at this and seeing what you think? And so he sent me over a few documents that they had put together, and I gave my feedback. And so we started talking, and a few months later, basically, he was like, we're looking to expand our team. We think you speak the right languages in terms of entrepreneurship and education. What do you think about San Diego? And at the time, having no full-time role at the moment, I was like, well, I'm very interested in San Diego. I had never been there. I'd never been to California. And so we started talking. I got a better handle on what they did. And I ended up saying yes. And so my wife and son and I moved from Michigan. Wasn't a U-Haul. We shipped our stuff in a pod this time, and then we drove across.
Okay, because you'd mentioned that you'd moved to California, so that was for this job.
That was it. Yep, 2017 to 2019, I lived in San Diego. I was the director of strategy and partnerships. It's a small organization, so when I joined, there were 7 people, I believe, 2 co-founders, me, a program manager, and a few other folks. They were supporting about 150 or so classrooms across the country, kindergarten through 12th grade. And so my role really broke down by those 2 terms, strategy and partnership. So on the one side, on the partnership side, they had already established some relationships with districts and organizations that were interested in their work, but they wanted to expand further. I have a pretty good network on Twitter and pretty active there. And so I have good relationships with a lot of different people, industries, professions. And so using that, my role on the partnership side was to kind of grow that side of things. So find other cities that might be interested in bringing Real World Scholars to their city, finding other organizations that could either provide mentorship or technology, funding, some other kind of support. And then finding districts, school leaders, individual teachers that were interested in this work, trying to incorporate more entrepreneurship or convert their project-based learning into a more entrepreneurial project-based learning experience. So that was kind of on the partnership side. And then on the strategy side, Real World Scholars had a program that they have currently is what they call EdCorps, which is education corporations. That's kind of the main way that they work with students in classrooms. The way that they get funding is by fundraising. And what they wanted to do is begin thinking differently about how can they leverage their existing assets, the materials that they've created, their network, the stories that are coming from the students and from the teachers. How can they leverage that in a way that would help them generate revenue that didn't require continuously fundraising? Oftentimes, nonprofits are, at least one person on the team is always fundraising. And if you have a small team, it oftentimes means that one of the executives or one of the leaders is doing that, which is fundraising, which means that they're not doing a whole range of other things to actually help the business or help the organization. And so part of the role on the strategy side was to begin thinking about what are other ways that we can leverage our position, we can leverage our assets, we can think differently about our work that could help us generate revenue that would make it so we didn't have to fundraise. And so I worked with co-founders in particular to try to figure out, okay, so what can we do? What do we know? What do we have? We came up with 3 ideas. One was on the EdCorp side. That was the one that was in motion already. But then 2 others that we thought had the potential based on partnerships or based on kind of incoming revenue that could help actually sustain RWS without fundraising. So jumping back to your actual question, the day-to-day work was a combination of making contact with people out in the broader world to attract them to RWS, to explain what RWS was. It involved traveling sometimes to different conferences or even just to different cities for multiple days and kind of convene happy hours and go visit and join different events and kind of try to generate some energy there. And also the strategy side, thinking about what is it that we have? What is it that we want? Where are we trying to go? What are we the best at compared to other people? Where do we sit in the ecosystem, and how does this position give us advantages in certain kinds of ways? Those kinds of things. That was my day-to-day pretty much.
If I were a student in a classroom where Real World Scholars was implemented, how would that impact me?
Great question. And the answer is, like so many things, it depends. It depends on how EdCorps, Education Corporation, is being implemented in your classroom. EdCorps can be implemented in a range of ways. Oftentimes there are teachers who do the business once a week. And every Wednesday is EdCorp Day, and all the students, maybe it's a 4th grade class, and all the students on Wednesday are working on the business in some capacity. Some teachers do it a little bit every day. Some have it as an after-school offering. So it really depends. But for you as a student, one other layer that it depends on kind of the age, right? So if you're a 1st grader, that experience is going to be a little bit different than if you're a 10th grader. There's a bunch of factors. It matters if you're, 1st graders that have access to a 3D printer have a different kind of experience than 1st graders who don't, and who have a different experience than 10th graders in a marketing class compared to 8th graders in an art class, right? So it's very, what is really cool about the EdCorps model is that it's incredibly flexible, and any educator currently in the US that's interested in this can really make it their own based on what they're interested in. So generally speaking, if I can kind of bring what's it called when you amalgamate, when you sort of bring everybody together a little bit, if I were to kind of extract answers from everybody, I would say something like, students, if you were a student engaging in an EdCorp, you would have opportunities to have your interests drive some of the work that you're doing. So one thing that's cool is that in a business requires a range of skills, and it requires a range of different tasks to get done. So it needs somebody who's good at art, who can design a logo and materials. It needs somebody who likes to work with their hands to actually put the pieces in the box, fold up the box, or build, there are woodworking companies, student companies, where they're actually building cool chairs and desks and tables and things, right? So that it requires that. It requires people who like to talk and can do cold calls and do sales. It requires people who are a bit more organized and can help kind of coordinate and mix, and make sure that things are getting done. It requires people who have sort of vision and creativity for what are we even doing here? Why are we doing this? It requires people who are decent at technology, who can start an Instagram for your business and share out with the broader world, right? And so you as a student have the ability to kind of self-select into the departments that are of interest to you. At the same time, some teachers rotate students through. So maybe you're interested in the marketing side, but also guess what? You're going to do packaging and you're going to do sales as well, because those skills are important. So you'll have the choice to do that. You'll have the ability to connect work you're doing in the classroom outside of the classroom. So oftentimes for students, they're doing geometry, and the bounds of the geometry are like the worksheet that they're doing, right? It's just like, nothing leaves this room. Like, it's all right here, which is one kind of educational experience, but it's another when the thing that I'm doing right now, people outside are going to see. When I'm working on a flyer for my business, the flyer is going to go to the bakery, and it's going to go to Home Depot or whatever's nearby, right? It's out in the world. Like that's a much different feeling for the work that you're doing compared to a typical education experience. So you get to choose what you're interested in. You can connect your current work to something outside. You get to actually meet people outside of the classroom. You get to grow your own personal social network, which is really important, and develop some social capital. There's a lot of things that you can learn. I'll stop there.
Oh, you're right. Like you mentioned earlier that students, it's great that you're able to implement something that's not purely academics, right? That they can be innovative and connect with the community and network and do all these things right from a young age.
That's totally it. I mean, we talk often about dissolving the walls between the classroom and the broader community. There's so much to gain by engaging in actually meaningful work that can have an impact beyond the walls of your classroom. And entrepreneurship is one way to do that.
Right. And it makes the student feel more motivated to, pitch in their ideas, knowing it's affecting the community.
Totally, 100%. And that it could like become a thing, right? Like it could become a product, or and I didn't even mention it's entrepreneurship. It's a business. They're actually able to sell things. One of the main technology that Real World Scholars created that helps to facilitate this is technology that allows people to purchase things from students and have all of the dollars, 100% of the dollars available to the students and the teacher. Currently, without this kind of technology, it's a little sketchy and it's questionable. Teachers are not trying to get fired having envelopes of cash under their desk, or the dollars go into a district account and students and the teacher may not ever have access to it again. What Real World Scholars has created is technology that makes it so that all the dollars that are coming from sales are available and all of the dollars are trackable. And so for districts and school leaders who are concerned about, teachers making money or people stealing or something, all of the dollars are trackable. You can see exactly where every single one of them goes, how much comes in, when was it taken out. Like all of that is completely transparent, which puts the school leader and the district leaders at ease.
Oh, I see. And with these are products that like students can come up with their own innovations.
Absolutely.
They can sell.
100%. And yeah, I think as adult entrepreneurs find out or know, like you can't know until you try something. You can't know until you go. And for young people to have that experience to create something and maybe it doesn't go well, and there are tons of opportunities to learn from and explore why it didn't go well. Is your logo confusing? Does the product not work? What about the timing? Where did you try to sell it? Like there's a million reasons that you can explore and learn from, and each one of those learnings can transfer to the next time you do this, or even to other aspects of your work and your world that can be valuable too.
So you said you were here for 2 years, and then where'd you go after that, and why'd you leave the company?
Yeah, so one of the, on the strategy side of things, I mentioned, there's EdCorps, and then we had a kind of a community classroom matching platform that we were exploring. And then we also began creating what is now EdSpace. We began to see teachers who were not getting the support that they deserved, teachers who, when connected with other teachers like them, came alive in new sorts of ways. And so we wanted to create a platform where that happened more often and all the time. And so that kind of led us down the path of where we are now, which is EdSpace. And so officially, I was with Real World Scholars, which is a nonprofit, for about 2 years. And towards the end of those 2 years, we had moved EdSpace to a place where it basically needed to branch off. And so EdSpace is a for-profit, it's an LLC. And in order for me to work full-time on the EdSpace side of things, I couldn't be working for RWS, so I had to switch over. So still, the same team basically. So the two co-founders of Real World Scholars are also co-founders with me of EdSpace, and so that's why we kind of had to branch off. And that was in, I guess, 2019, 2018, somewhere in there is kind of when that switch happened.
When did you register it officially as an LLC?
That is a really good question. I'm pretty sure it was the end of 18 is when we officially registered. And as we started building, we needed, it would, our lawyers were encouraging us strongly to make sure that the people doing the work on this project were not being paid by a nonprofit while working for a for-profit. And so I am full-time on EdSpace, and so I had to jump over.
I see. So then you got those ideas while you were working at Real World Scholars, and you were able
Yep.
to make it, your own company now. So can you
Yep.
talk a bit about what does EdSpace offer?
Yeah. So EdSpace is a place for teachers to be able to share ideas, to ask questions, to get feedback. Right now, in the space of education, there is no one place for teachers to go, no one place for educators to go. Educators, including librarians and counselors and school leaders, to go to connect with one another. They're using tools like Twitter and Facebook, which is great because those are big platforms and they have great features and they work well in lots of ways. And also those platforms are not built for educators. And so there's a lot of other stuff on there. There's a lot of reasons why many teachers don't go on there for professional purposes. And so we wanted to create a professional space where teachers from anywhere, educators from anywhere, all over the world, anytime, any place, using short videos, so less than 3 minutes, and videos that delete. So it's not like YouTube. It's more like Snapchat or Instagram stories where the videos are only available up to 7 days unless people are interacting with them, in which case they last for longer. But a place for them to go and connect with others like them. So they can post up a quick question, 15 seconds, about design thinking and say, hey, I'm looking to implement this particular curriculum in my class, but I haven't done it before. Anybody have any ideas? And other teachers interested in design thinking would see that post and they could reply with their own video, or they could use text comments, kind of like YouTube, to be able to reply. And from there, it's those relationships. You begin to identify other teachers like you, other teachers who have similar interests or aspirations. And ultimately, it's about the relationships. It's not about finding certain kinds of resources or lesson plans. There are websites, and plenty of them, where you can go and search for colors for third graders and find maybe not third graders. You can search for things and find lesson plans for pretty much whatever you need. But what's not really possible, or many of the sites don't facilitate the connection of the people behind those things. That's really what EdSpace was built to do for the world of education. Now we're beginning to shift a bit. We launched officially in February of this year, we were probably 3 weeks before COVID shut everything down. And so our plans around working with schools and districts had to shift because schools and districts, teachers were under siege, experiencing immense trauma and disruption from COVID. So we had to shift a bit. We tried a range of different ways to engage educators on the platform. And what we've learned is that at the moment, educators are not as able, from a pure bandwidth standpoint, based on all the things that they're working to do, to lean into this kind of technology that, even though they might want support and need it and feel like they have to get it, from what we've heard from them, they don't even have time beyond figuring out exactly what they need to have in order to teach the next day, basically. Mm-hmm. So we're beginning to think about how can our existing technology, this asynchronous video collaboration, on channels, how can that be valuable and useful in other industries? So maybe it's in the corporate learning space, or maybe there's something about kind of media and content production where this kind of technology would be valuable. Maybe it's in existing work environments where right now they're using Zoom, and then you go from Zoom and you jump onto Slack and kind of, there's this like cycle of Zoom and Slack. And maybe there's a place for asynchronous video to serve as a better way to communicate and collaborate when everybody is working remotely. So we're beginning to drift into that direction.
Is it only educators that can post things on here?
Technically, no, but generally, yes. It is a platform currently for the world of education, is the way we talk about it. So it could be faculty, it could be teachers, it could be librarians or researchers or education technology consultants. Basically, anybody in and around education can log in. Technically, anybody can jump in there and start exploring. We've had some good conversations with universities who are thinking about how this could be a beneficial piece of technology for students. What we built currently, we intentionally exclude students 18 and under, basically the K-12 space at the moment, more for kind of privacy concerns. What we want to do is validate that the model works amongst the adults before we begin to think about how it could be valuable for younger students. But college students are generally over 18, so considered adults in this case. And so thinking about how EdSpace could augment the existing LMSs that they're using could be really interesting. Right now, Blackboard, Canvas, they have text-based discussion boards that, from the research that we have done and our own experience, they're usually only used if the faculty requires it. Nobody is really jumping on there to engage in intellectual conversations. But if there were this ability to use short videos, which young people are much more familiar with and comfortable with, then it could be an opportunity.
Okay, yeah, because that's why I was wondering, are students able to post questions on there, or is it just educators? It's not really questions that students might have about what they're taught. It's more for the innovation side of education or curriculum or questions like that. But it's not really for students to be posting like academic questions on there.
Not at the moment. I mean, I think we would be open to those kinds of discussions on EdSpace for sure, especially if they're kind of in the spirit of learning, but it's not quite built for that at the moment.
Okay. And I like the idea where the videos expire after a few days if they're not interacted with. Sometimes I'll go on a website, like I'll go to Yahoo Answers, I'll see that somebody posted a question, but I want to answer it, but then I don't know if that person's ever going to check because it was posted like 10 years ago. That is good because it should be questions that are current, like within the same week. Like people want answers quick. If someone didn't find the answer to their homework question in a day or two, they're probably not going to look back on that website. And so it's just taking up space and people are going to be clicking through it, not really getting anything.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly it. I mean, I can't tell you how many times anybody has gone and searched for something. Maybe they even found something they're interested in. They kind of scroll down to the comments and the comments are from 5 years ago. And you're like, what, who, I don't even know if this is true anymore. Yeah. And these people are not going to get this if I respond to them. And so we wanted to create a platform where everything was either current, so it was less than 7 days old, or people were engaging with it, right? So on EdSpace, if you post something, the 7-day clock starts. 2 days into it, if somebody replies to it, the 7-day clock starts over again. And so the idea is that as people engage, if there's a great conversation going, the clock keeps restarting. So that conversation is not going to go away until people stop engaging with it for 7 days. Or, to your other point, if you post something and nobody replies to it, either the question was confusing or people didn't know the answer, and maybe you could post it again in a different way, or maybe you could tag some people to try to see if there are some folks that do actually know it. But it leaves the platform then. It doesn't occupy real estate within the platform. A bunch of unanswered questions are not occupying real estate. Instead, everything is either brand new, less than 7 days old, or people are engaging with it.
Right. And then you mentioned that you wanted to expand this like to students as well as to the workplace. So in terms of the workspace aside from educators, how would that work?
Yeah. So right now, companies, if we're going to the corporate learning space, companies often have their own portals where they either have different videos or courses that people can watch or participate in. They often have intranet kind of services that they use, sort of internal Slack essentially. And so what we're imagining is basically kicking both of those up a notch by making asynchronous video part of what they're doing from that learning and communication side. So yes, you go and watch your video. So we had a great conversation. I had a great conversation with somebody who is in the corporate training space. And so corporate training right now is like, okay, new hire, sit down in front of this terminal for 8 hours, watch these videos, and there's quizzes afterwards. And like, that's the extent of the training. And maybe it goes on for a day or two or more. So that's one way to do it. But imagine if a handful of new hires all over the world are not only tuning into some videos and ingesting some content, but they're then able to generate their own short video clips by themselves and reflect out and share and begin to engage in conversations, and not just through text, which is better than nothing, but through videos where you can see people's face and hear their voice and get a sense of their energy and their passion and the tone and all of these things that are part of the nonverbal communication. Imagine if that were part of it. So that's like one side on the corporate training side. The other is on the, still thinking about asynchronous video. Oftentimes people will jump into a meeting. There'll be 10 people on a call. One person talks for a little while. Then another person talks for a little while. Another person talks for a little while. And so over the course of an hour, a handful of people have talked, a handful of ideas have been thrown out. But imagine if there was one kind of prompt video or prompt question, and then everybody got a chance using their own video to reply to it. And then you could go in and you could see like, oh, Billy replied to the comment by this. Oh, that's an interesting thought. I'm going to reply to Billy's right now. And oh, Susie said this. I hadn't thought about that. I'm going to reply to Susie's, right? And you could generate so many more interesting kind of, imagine it just sort of splintering, spidering out the conversations and the ideas. And so we see that there's an interesting play there. And there are people already that are talking about the power of asynchronous video. We think that the platform that we have and some of the technology that we're working on would be a great way for a company to say, okay, we really like this a lot. We like this asynchronous. We like these channels. We like the disappearing video feature. We like the ability to engage and reply with videos in this kind of way. This, I think, could be a solution for us from a remote collaboration standpoint. So those are kind of the two ideas on the corporate side that we're wrestling with right now.
When you're in a meeting and there's people, giving their ideas, you don't always have the opportunity, and maybe in a meeting of 30 people, you don't always have the opportunity to give your feedback to whatever someone's saying. With this, everyone can reply to everyone else's idea, even if you're not in direct contact with them. Where do you hope to bring this in the next couple years?
We are excited about what we're exploring here. I mean, we have some other ideas in the works around some technology that can help dissect existing video files. So imagine you're in a 20-person Zoom call and there is a conversation happening and it is this kind of very linear, straightforward way. Imagine if technology could help segment those aspects. Then you could interact with those segments on your own as you are. So we're excited about some ideas around this technology. I think, again, where it's heading is in non-education spaces, unfortunately, at least non-K-12. I think there's absolutely application in higher ed that we're having some conversations about at the moment. Mm-hmm. And there's especially conversations to be had outside of education, which we just haven't. We've gotten some good feedback from folks on the outside saying there is a need here, there's opportunity here, but we haven't really pursued it. It's a little bit newer for us. Mm-hmm. So ultimately what we're hoping to do, especially that COVID has happened, we know that over time people will begin going back to work in person for the most part, but that remote will play a much bigger role, that hybrid experiences where maybe 1 or 2 days in office and a few days out. The future of work is a really fascinating place, and we think that asynchronous video in this kind of way could play a major part in helping to not only continue to drive productivity, but also continue to connect the human pieces of it. I think part of the experience that many are having in COVID right now is that people are missing other people. I mean, it's one thing to kind of like see somebody on a screen, but it's another to be with people in person. And even though the future may be more screens, there are probably better ways and more creative ways and more technology enabled ways that screens can help. That's what we want to be part of. We want to be part of a future where work feels more human, work feels more kind of enriching and productive. And we think asynchronous video is a way to get there.
If students had the ability to, go on there and put up questions that they were struggling with or topics they needed clarification with, people could respond to them with a short video. And there could be sections like, 9th grade math or 10th grade math or whatever classes they were struggling with. And then the professors could interact with them and answer that as well. But again, it would be very current. So it would only be questions that were interacted with. So that would be really cool. Because every time I tried to do my homework and I would go online, I would just find things that were very out of date. It would be nice to have that kind of place.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a great idea. I think it's another avenue within the education space that we can begin to explore.
You have a ton of experience working in innovation and education and all this interesting stuff. So that is really cool. And I wish you the best of luck with EdSpace. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the time and for the opportunity to chat. And I really appreciate what you're doing with the podcast. So thank you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning into today's episode, and we'll see you next time.